My name is Gina Roxas. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful day. Finally have some spring weather. It's been a while. We were teased a little bit earlier. So thank you all for sharing some time with me. I'm going to share my screen. I actually have two presentations today, and I'm hoping to get through both of them because I think they're both really very valuable. Okay, here we go. Oops. All right, so the theme that Trickster Cultural Center and myself have adapted this year was healing for one, healing for all. And we've been very mindful through our programs, our events, and all of the things that we're doing this year, very intentional on that theme of healing for one, healing for all. And what does that mean? And what does that look like? Well, first, defining what is healing. For many folks, when you think of healing, you think of, grabbing a bottle of medicine, taking a pill, seeing a doctor, going to the hospital. But healing could take so many other forms. In the Native community, healing can be the act of laughter, the connection to community, and other things that we do, connections to nature, connections to our culture, songs, food. Food is medicine for us as well, as what we consider. And so a lot of the healing that I have done personally and also through our program is healing through gardening. And going back to our traditional teachings, I'm a member of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. We are located in Mayetta, Kansas. And so I have been gardening, my family has been gardening for several generations. What you see on the screen now is 5 living generations still living of my family. We continue to get our hands dirty, garden, steward the land. In my language, in the Potawatomi language, and I apologize, I don't know much of it. I'm still a learner, but there was one word called getagan, and getagan could mean a garden, like a small vegetable garden, a box garden that you may have, or it can mean crops that you're growing for the entire community. There is no differentiation. And so we've all had, in my family, different forms of getagan. Whether it was a community garden, raised bed, or our backyard garden, or cropland. And so for many people who you may or may not know, Potawatomi people were here in the Great Lakes area. I want to take this moment to acknowledge that we are on Native land. We are on the most recent folks who have come and settled here, the traditional homelands of the Potawatomi people. Other Native American tribes have settled here, called this place home, or have passed through. Some we know their names, others we may never know their names, and I want to acknowledge them. And acknowledge that today, the Chicagoland area is the 3rd largest urban Native area in the United States. And so there are many Native Americans throughout the Chicagoland area representing hundreds of Native American tribes. And so when we talk about Native American, that's a general term, just like someone from the outside calling us Americans. We're all Americans, but we are all very different and have different backgrounds and different cultures and traditions. And so today, the Chicagoland area has this vast knowledge of Native American people and culture, and rich in these different types of teachings. For the Potawatomi people, we were the most recent who had settled here, and we were forcibly removed in 1838. Many folks know the Trail of Tears. We had what was called the Trail of Death, and we were forcibly moved from Indiana through to Mayetta, Kansas, where my family lives. And along that way, although the route doesn't go directly through Chicago, there were folks who were removed from the Chicagoland area and part of this caravan. And so many folks that I talk to don't have the experience of being on a reservation land, or perhaps they do. A lot of people that I have talked to who have gone on reservations have gone to reservations that maybe are out west or out southwest, and maybe have not been to the Prairie Band Potawatomi Reservation. So this is out in Mayetta, Kansas. This is the land that we still hold and we still steward. We have several animals that we care for. We care for them. They're rescue animals. So they're considered domesticated pets. But our neighbors also have herds of cows that they use for production. And throughout the Kansas area, there are different types of farms that we're neighbors with. But our land here is out in Mayetta, Kansas. And as you can see, it is a different landscape than it was of our traditional home in the Great Lakes. We have a small little creek that is maybe several inches wide. We don't have that access to the Great Lakes, to that wonderful water. Although Mayetta sits on an aquifer, it's still, we're still having to really be mindful of the water that we're using. And so it's just a very different environment. And when the Potawatomi people are not unique to this. There are many other tribes, many other cultures who have been removed and have been resettled in different areas. And so when we talk about climate change and adaptations and adjustments for climate change, who should we talk to? Of course, we're listening to the scientists and to those who are studying the environment today, but we also should step back and seek out our indigenous cultures, our indigenous knowledge. Not just the Native American indigenous, but indigenous knowledge everywhere. We have already experienced a climate change. And so how do we adapt? How did we adapt? And maybe incorporating some of those teachings or understandings in our climate change action plans that we're developing. And so for us, at least for myself, a lot of my knowledge from my tradition comes through oral teachings, through storytelling. There is a lot of storytelling, and some of the stories that are lighthearted, some of them have several layers of meaning. And so a lot of folks have asked me, so where is a book? How can I find a book on these stories? Why is that not accessible? And it's really difficult for me to answer. Some of that has to do with our elders. It wasn't until the 70s where our traditions, our culture, or even our language was legal. Before the 70s, it was illegal to speak our language or practice our traditions, our culture. So all of this was done behind closed doors and in secret and held and very guarded. And so I think still part of the reasons why we don't openly share these in a Western way is because of that experience and that trauma from earlier. I mean, the 1970s aren't that far away. It is a fairly recent history for us. And so we're still holding to oral teachings and oral traditions. And it really gets you to think, really gets you to try to be very focused on what you're listening to. I tell my students in the summer camps, my youth, the Creator gave us one mouth and two ears. And that was very intentional. We have two ears to listen twice as much as we speak. If Creator wanted us to speak more, he would have given us two mouths and one ear. And so Creator makes us perfect. And our perfect being is to be intentional in listening and maybe speak a little less. And so with these teachings, it may take several times of listening to the stories to be able to get the meaning and be able to remember that. and our use of technology. When we talk about technology today, we talk about a lot of this has to do with being internet-based or cloud-based or online or web-based. When we think about technology, we think about computers and the internet and plant apps. And those are all great technologies, but we also have technology. Nature has technology of their own, of its own. The moon and the stars, the cycles of that, the seasons, the water, the land itself, there is technology in there. What I'm showing you here on the screen is a wigwam. And it looks like a very rudimentary housing or dwelling. This is what you would typically see in the Great Lakes. We didn't necessarily have teepees. We had these more sturdier, more stable dwellings called wigwams. We were a little more stationary than our Great Plains relatives who are more nomadic. And so this looks very rudimentary, but it is a very clever form of technology. What you're seeing is all natural based. The frame are poles of willow or tarmac that are used, and they're specifically sought out because they're very flexible, but when they dry very sturdy. And even the shape of this wigwam, if you think about the Great Lakes area, think about where we're at now, we get some heavy snowfall. And so if this wasn't built this way, all of that snow would collapse the structure. But because of the way the structure has been built and tied together with these different layers, different levels, it distributes the weight very evenly, and we're able to maintain the structure through heavy rains, through snow, through different weather conditions that we would see here in the Great Lakes. Those panels that you see, that is from the birch bark. So that's parts of birch bark that are used as panels. Birch bark is very water resistant. And so again, giving another protective layer of from the environment, from the rains and the snows that we see. The other thing that would go with this is the cattails. So you see here a picture of cattails. So we would gather those leaves. And if anyone has ever been up close with a cattail, the leaves have, they're not flat, they're more of a V shape. There's an indentation in the middle. So if you put two cattails together, you form these air pockets. And so making mats out of these cattails with these different air pockets would create a honeycomb effect. And we would line the wigwam with those mats of cattails, and that would help insulate this wigwam, keeping it cool in the summer and warm in the winter time. And this is all very sustainable. It's biodegradable. When it was time to leave the wigwam to build a new one or to move on, then we would burn the wigwam and return it to the earth. So I always, when I think of technology, I always think of the wigwam, and especially that leaf of the cattail. Oops. So next we talk about working together, and what better example would be our Three Sisters. And so many people have incorporated that Three Sisters planting. It was given to us as a gift from the Haudenosaunee people out east. And they would grow their gardens this way as companion planting. The Three Sisters are a combination of corn, bean, and squash. What you're seeing here is our Three Sisters at the Oakton Community Garden in the raised beds. And you can't see it up close, but we grew these Three Sisters in mounds. So we didn't dig the soil, we added soil and formed a mound to grow the Three Sisters on there. And this is some traditional Potawatomi red flint corn. We have some Potawatomi rabbit beans, And then on the bottom there, instead of squash, I grew some small pumpkins. And so it can be incorporated. You can use different varieties of corn, different varieties of beans, different types of squash. It's a very beautiful, beautiful form, a way of planting. And their studies have been shown, they did do some experimentation, and I can't remember what the school at the moment, but growing it this way, there was a higher yield of corn, bean, and squash as opposed to growing those three crops as a monoculture. It's also less inputs that you have to input into the soil, conserving water, conserving nutrients, and less pest control that you have. You have that beautiful squash plant on the bottom growing there as a natural mulch, and holding in all of the extra moisture. And the squash plant, you know, the prickly stems would keep some of those insects and even the smaller critters away from your corn. If anyone's tried to plant corn, especially in a wooded area, you're pretty much fighting the deer and the squirrels for the corn before you're able to harvest. And then we have the beautiful beans, and anyone who has grown a vegetable garden might know that legumes are just a very clever plant. They're able to take that atmospheric oxygen and bring it to their root systems. And then their root systems, the root systems hold a bacteria that's able to convert that nitrogen into food for the next season, for the next generation. So again, another very sustainable, very clever form of technology that we were so fortunate to be able to utilize from the Haudenosaunee people, and that's spread throughout the country. Many different tribes utilize this Three Sisters plant. I've even seen folks create a five-sister plant, a four-sister plant, incorporating tobacco or other plants as a companion planting. And when we think of it, of course, I only have a few plants here, a few Three Sisters plants, but the Haudenosaunee people were so efficient at doing this. They were growing acres of these Three Sisters to feed entire communities, yielding lots and lots of food for their people. And so this brings me to Trickster. We are Trickster Cultural Center now. We were Trickster Art Gallery, but we've started doing more outreach and more programming that centered on nature, is centered on education. And so our name changed to Trickster Cultural Center. And although our building is a public building, we were able to provide input and guidance into the garden. And we created this healing garden. Most of the plants here, except for maybe two or three, are native to Illinois. And all of the plants have some traditional connection to Native American culture, Native American healing, whether it was healing from physical ailments or healing mentally or healing spiritually. All of the plants that you see at the Trickster Garden are healing plants. And we've been stewarding this garden since 2005. And we can continue to learn more and more about these beautiful plants. We also grow our traditional plants that are not native to Illinois. Some of the tobacco comes from the south, from the Mexico region. We have some sweetgrass that's more from the north, Minnesota, Canada, and we have sage. We have a couple of varieties of sage that are from out west. But those are plants that we continuously use even in everyday practice. For the sage, we utilize that in smudging and the act of smudging. So we'll grow the sage and we'll dry them in bundles. And when they're dry, we'll light them and we utilize the smoke to what we call smudging. And smudging is a form of cleansing. So we will smudge a new exhibit that's coming in, or we'll smudge ourselves when we're doing a presentation or having a program, or we'll smudge the garden when it's time to plant. And so those are That's one of the plants that we use quite often. And then we have our tobacco. The tobacco that we're growing, we're using that for ceremonies. So that's being used in our fires, in our traditional fires. It hasn't been used for smoking. I suppose it could be, but the tobacco that we're using comes from Mexico, from southern Mexico, and it came from one of our native relatives. They, her and her husband crossed the border into the United States, and they had one plastic jewel bag that they shared amongst themselves between the two of them. And so if you can imagine having to leave your home and on foot and go to another place, and all you had was a plastic bag, what would you think would be the most important thing that you would put in that bag? What would be most important to you to not leave behind as you begin your journey? And one of those was these tobacco seeds. The tobacco plant that we're growing, she grew, and she can trace it back 300 years from with her family growing that type of tobacco. And she was so generous in sharing those seeds with us. And that was about 4 years ago when we first started doing this programming. And we've been able to share those seeds every season with folks. And it's so beautiful when you're gifted those seeds, and there's such a wonderful story that goes behind it. I know some of our seeds, we have to go to a store and purchase them, or purchase them online. And that's just something that we have to do. But if you're able to pass down seeds, or share seeds, exchange seeds with others, having that story that comes with the plant is just so much more valuable than purchasing a starter plant or seeds from an online site or from a catalog. I encourage everyone, if you're gifting seeds, write the story down, even if it's a short story, where you got the seed from, or what it invokes you, what the seed invokes you, what is your relationship. And then, like I said before, food is medicine. And so we do have some raised beds at Oakton Community College at their in their community garden. And as you can see, our beds are not as similar as what you would see a typical garden bed. We have done a lot of intercropping, a lot of just letting things grow and seeing what we can do, or how we can utilize them. As you can see, we've got some milkweed growing outside the beds, and we let that go as pollinator plants, but we also use milkweed. We use the first leaves, and the newer leaves we can use to make a soup. So that soup is really, really very tasty. But you use the newer leaves. The older leaves are a little more bitter. And so that's a really, really wonderful soup that you can incorporate into your diet. Has very similar quality spinach, lots of iron, lots of vitamins. And I make it with chicken stock, and then I add some root vegetables to it. How you can make the soup is you gather the leaves, the newer leaves, you boil those leaves for 10 minutes, you throw the water out, you put fresh water in, and then you boil that a second time and add your root vegetables. You boil it in vegetable or chicken stock and add your root vegetables, and it's a beautiful, really beautiful soup. But you don't want to just boil it and add your vegetables. You want to get some of that bitterness and the toxins out, so you don't make yourself sick, especially if you're not accustomed to milkweed. You can have a little bit of an upset stomach. I know an elder of mine has taught me that you can use the sticky stuff from the leaves and put that on poison ivy. And that's supposed to help speed up the healing of poison ivy. That milk that comes out of the leaves, I was told you can use that. I've never, knock on wood, I've never had poison ivy, so I don't know firsthand if that's used, but he claims that he's used it quite a bit, and it's very helpful. And then one of my favorite plants is corn. And so corn, comes from the grass, this beautiful ancient grass plant. And when you think of corn, a lot of folks think of that big yellow ear of corn, super sweet corn that you find in the grocery stores, or frozen corn or canned corn. But in Native culture, and I think in almost every tribe, there's some form of corn, and it comes in so many different colors and shapes and flavors. I just love how corn can adapt and take form from different cultures and different tribes. We've seen corn grown in pretty much every region in the world. I believe there's even a variety of corn that's grown in Antarctica. So just a beautiful gift that we've been given, and that has been shared with our southern Indigenous folks from the Mexico region, and we're very thankful for them for that. And so when we think of past cultures and we think of Native American tribes, I want to make sure that we're thinking of the tribes as scientists and gardeners and mathematicians and engineers. This corn is not wild. This corn was cultivated many centuries by many folks from the Mexico region. And it was mostly, I would guess, mostly the women that worked on this. And it was just it's a beautiful plant that has been connected with Native folks since forever. And then brought over to Europe and Asia and other countries to be utilized as well, and making their own connections to corn. It just is a really beautiful plant that we have all are connected to. I know sometimes it gets a bad rap from the commercialization, but if you think about the care that was taken to cultivating it, crossing the ideal plants and the trial and errors that it took to get to where we are now, it's just a really beautiful story, corn. And so we do a lot of field study. That's what we would call it in science, I suppose, field study. But really, it's experiential learning is another word. But this is something that we just do. It's careful, close observation. And so there is, people often wonder, well, how did Native Americans figure out what plant was medicine, what plant was poison, how did we all figure that out? And so the first guess would be, well, we just walked through the forest and started eating and sharing plants and figuring out what happened and seeing the side effects. And I think if that was the case, a lot of us wouldn't be here because we would have been succumbed to various ailments from the plants. I don't think we just willy-nilly went through the forest chomping on things. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Some Native cultures say that our plant medicine came from dreams, and that might be the case too. I know folks even today who are close and work close with plant knowledge. They'll have a dream of a medicine and what types of plants need to be part of that medicine, and that's how they get their medicine. One of the other ways that I think we found our medicine was by observing the animals, especially the bison. So bison are a keystone species to Illinois. They were here with us in the past. And I really strongly believe that we followed the bison, we observed the bison. Bison were part of our diet. But these bison are really very smart. When they're not feeling well, they will seek out a specific plant for a specific ailment. They will seek out a specific tree or a skin condition. They will seek out different areas in the prairie to help them and to make them feel better. They're just very, very, very smart animals, and I would suspect that is how we learned some of our plant medicine, by just watching them and incorporating what they're eating in our diet. after all, we're both mammals. And so I think sharing that plant knowledge from the bison, I think that was a lot of how a lot of our plant knowledge came to be. And again, hands-on application. So I talked a lot about the past. Here in the present, we are still trying to incorporate our traditional knowledge in our teachings, and doing it in a traditional way, passing it down through oral storytelling and hands-on application. What you're seeing here is one of our youth working on our garden. We're getting ready to plant, and she's smudging the land that she's going to plant on. As well as working with the Western sciences and doing these simple experiments and working with the seeds and with the plants that we're gifted. We as Native people have to adapt. Here in Illinois, we don't have a native land per se. There is not a reserve land where we can gather our seeds or hunt or practice some of the plant knowledge that we've been gifted. And so we work in collaboration. I work a lot with the Forest Preserve of Cook County and the Morton Arboretum and other natural spaces in a collaboration where we're both learning from each other and incorporating knowledge from both sides so that both communities benefit from what we can learn from each other. And so I wanted to share with you, as I talked about collaboration, I wanted to share with you one of the recent projects that we're doing. Let me just pull that up. Share my screen again. One moment. Okay, so can everyone see that? So we are doing a study with the McHenry County Preservation Society, and they're doing what I'm calling it as a rematriation by bison, and it's the reintroduction of bison in McHenry County. First, I want to go through a few terms. So native, when I talk about native, I talk about the original inhabitants of this area, human and non-human. And rematriation, what is that word? So that word is an indigenous term that was coined in some papers and in certain archaeology and anthropology work by indigenous people, which means returning the sacred to the mother. Returning whether it's sacred items, sacred people, to Mother Earth. And rematriation, in this project, we're returning the bison to Mother Earth. In this area, in the McHenry County area, there were bison before. Bison, like I said, are a keystone species. And so those are very important species in our ecology. And then we have TEK, which is traditional environmental knowledge. So the knowledge that comes from those oral teachings and practices that Native cultures have. And then another term that I use a lot is Turtle Island. Turtle Island comes from one of our stories of how the land we live on has formed, and the story invokes the turtle. And so there are stories and our origin stories and other stories throughout our culture. However, this is not the time for storytelling. Storytelling usually happens in the wintertime. In the Potawatomi culture, we tell stories only in the winter after the first snowfall or when there's snow on the ground. And the reason being is that out of respect for our plant and animal life, we won't tell the story until it's winter. our thinking is that in the wintertime, the migratory birds are flying south for the winter and the insects are south. So they've left. And the other animals who are still here, they're hunkered down in their nest, in their homes, hibernating. And so, and also our plant life is deep in the seedbed. And so everything is asleep. Mother Nature is asleep. And so that's the time to tell the stories. If we were to tell stories today, right now, well, the birds are flying and the insects are around and the plants are growing, it would be like I was telling a story about you and telling this to a group of people, but never even acknowledging that you were present in the room. It'd be a little awkward. I can't speak plant, I can't speak migratory bird. And so out of respect, I tell that story when they're gone, when they're asleep, or when they have gone for the winter. Again, out of respect. So a little bit of background about this. So McHenry County Conservation District, that's a not-for-profit organization, and they steward over 25,000 acres of space. And so they had a private bison production owner lease part of their land. And so the bison were introduced and then have established a small herd. We just this past couple of months, we've decided to also partner with them in looking at and observing how this area is affected by the reintroduction of bison. In April, just a couple months ago, or last month, we did our first Native American-led observation of the herd. And so this is a herd, it's not a domesticated herd, it's a herd that was intentionally put there for production, to sell for food. The owner is not Native, and the owner of the land is this McHenry County Conservation District. So there's three people interplayed in here. Trickster Cultural Center, our Native community, the McHenry County Conservation District, and then as well as this private bison owner. And so I don't think that's ever happened before. Maybe it has, but it's very unique, this interplay. And so a little history about the bison, and I'm sure you're probably thinking, I came here to learn about plants. Why am I learning about bison? So I apologize for that. But bison are so integral to the plant life. We talk about beavers and how beavers are engineers of the waterways and the river systems. Bison are the engineers of the prairie. They have so much power to convey onto this land and so much to contribute. And working in that land and being able to bring forth an energy that was needed and was lacking since many, many years. And so what we thought was through our research with and listening to traditional stories, we had thought that, positive social, environmental, and economic consequences could occur with a collective plan of bison rematriation. So I'm advocating, let's get more bison out in these natural areas as part of a stewardship plan, restoration, conservation plan, where we can incorporate some commercialism as well as traditional teachings and traditional connections. And so that was kind of the hypothesis. That was the hypothesis that we were looking at and we were observing and starting to research. And this is a continued research study, and we'll continue to observe the bison on a seasonal basis. And so what we did, we went and we observed the bison. So we went in these Jurassic Park looking ATVs and we went directly to the bison. We were there intentionally designed to only be there for an hour. These bison are not domesticated and we do not want to incorporate a familiarity to humans. They should not, that we don't want to disrupt their ecosystem, and we were being very respectful to their home. We studied the grazing environment compared to the non-grazing environment. So the looking at the fence line, what the land looked like inside the fence line, what the land looked outside the fence line. We brought someone from the Oneida Nation who had these very beautiful drums, bison songs that his culture uses when they were on a bison hunt. And so he came and he sang these songs. And then we did some observation and personal reflection and started to gather this data. I really wanted to see a lot of the environmental impact, but I also wanted to see the human impact. How did this reconnecting to the bison, reconnecting to this land, how did that affect this small little group? For me, I really think that the land has a memory. I think these bison, although they're not from a Native production company, they've never experienced Native American culture. I think they have a remembrance in their DNA as well of us from the past. And so we brought that drum. This land has never heard the drum before, or has heard the drum, but has not since many, many years ago. And I've never been that close to bison. We do have bison on our land, on the reservation, not on our land, but on the reservation, but we're not as close to the bison as we were on this one. And just, trying to see how does this work and how does this incorporate, how can we incorporate these teachings? And so this is a photo of the bison. This is not a close-up. This is just where we were, where the ATV stopped. And as you can see, they're grazing, and they're in a very nice little kind of family. This is a matriarchal herd. And so the leader, I guess is what you would call, is female, and most of the I think all of the herd is male. And so you can see the grassy area where they're grazing, and it's very interesting. They graze, they're constantly moving, unlike cattle who will graze and cows who will graze right down to the earth. They constantly move. They nibble a little here, they nibble a little there. And they're moving around. And it has been observed that they do seek out different plants, and they do dislike certain plants. Unfortunately, they are disliking some of those invasive species, the thistle and other species that we were hoping, or the conservation group was hoping would be eaten, but they are not liking them as well. And so when we come back in the summertime, we're going to observe what type of plant life is going on there. How did this introduction of bison, how did that help or hurt the land? What we're seeing already, and these bison have only been here, I think, for 18 months. What they're already seeing is the native bed seed, the native seed bed is being enhanced. They are reseeding the area, but that was a practice they did even before the bison came. But they're seeing in the bison area, they're seeing and hoping that the seed bed is being built up more efficiently and better and denser, because the bison are walking on this land, compacting that soil, making that seed to soil contact solid through their movements. And then bison, they make these wallows where they kind of roll around and dust themselves. And these wallow areas, they're seeing insect life that they didn't see before being established, these mini ecosystems, and the soil becoming more fluffier, not as compact. This was farmland before, and not as compact as the land was before. And so it'll be interesting to see what type of plant environment grows in these wallows. And then one of the things that they noticed as well is the bird nests. So these bison, they find trees and they'll rub on the trees or they'll rub on the fencing to scratch themselves, and they'll leave behind, you know, bits of their fur. And they're seeing that the nesting, bird nesting is increasing, and the nests that are being observed, 90% of those nests have that bison fur. So that bison fur is offering a resource for them. And with more attraction of birds, you get more species coming in, you get migration of seeds, and all of these other good inputs. So it's looking really very promising, especially for the plant life, being able to reestablish a prairie land with very little human impact, very little inputs that we usually see in a restoration project. And I'm sure, I'm positive that we will see a lot of our traditional plant life as well coming up in the years to come. So this was a really great project. It happened to be, you know, a commercial farmer needed land for his bison. The conservation district leased the land. We made a connection with the conservation district, so we're providing some cultural teaching and cultural knowledge with these bison. We're hoping that we can come into some sort of agreement where perhaps we can share or barter some of the byproducts from the production of bison, creating an even more sustainable system for this company and also for the conservation district. And then last but not least, before I finish, I'll stop sharing my screen. I had wanted to find, so again, you know, what was the reasoning behind bringing the native culture in? So I talked about, you know, remembering and remembering our history and our connection. So this is, so we can stop sharing this one. This should not be recorded. The quality wasn't the greatest, but it, you know, I hope you get the gist of it. And you saw that as soon as he started drumming, the bison did turn and start looking towards him. And on his left, there was a group of 3 or 4 bison. They started actually walking towards him. It was a little bit scary, to be honest with you, but they started walking towards him. And then he sang another song, the last song he sung before we decided to leave. And he started singing the song, and then the matriarch started nudging the rest of the herd to leave, and they left. They just like turned around and ran away. And after he was done with the song, he said the song he sang was the harvest song, the song that they usually sang right before they did the kill. So I don't know if those bison remembered what that song was or not, but it was just really very interesting. And it's going to be really interesting to see what type of plant life comes up with these introduction of bison and this way of restoring the land.
Okay, so Gina, thank you so much for this very informative talk. And I'm sure everybody else learned a lot, because I know I did. And as a reminder, if you have questions, please type them into the chat. This is a webinar situation, so everybody's on mute. And Stephanie, take it away. Stephanie's our question monitor today.
So there was a question about a general translation or message of the drumming lyrics, but I feel like you maybe answered that.
So that original, that song that we saw, that was recorded, that was an honoring song for the bison. So it was an honor song, and it's in the Oneida language. I don't know the translation to the lyrics, but it's a song of thanks and a song to thank the bison.
There are several thank yous for the talk. If anybody has a question, go ahead and put it into the chat. I have a question. The talking about the bison made me think about it. And so one time I was out at a place called Boosie Woods and they had elk. And then it occurred, I don't know, I had never thought about elk are probably also supposed to be here. And I wondered if there's anything about elk at all. And I feel like I read that they, eat shrubs. So I don't know if they would, bringing them back would help too with some of the restoration efforts. Sometimes when some of the shrubs, when they do fire on the prairie, some shrubs survive that do really well. And then if there were elk, that might help too. So I don't know if you can speak to anything about elk.
Yeah, so the particular elk that you're talking about is at Bussy Woods. And that was I was told they're there because it's Elk Grove Village. So they brought elk to justify the name of the city. I don't know if that's true or not. But there are elk there. I think there's 3 of them and they've been there for a while. But we do still eat elk. It's a beautiful soup out of the bones that we use that I've had with elk. And I would think again, incorporating the elk into the restoration plan also would be very beneficial. And I believe they like you said, they eat shrubs and they eat there's specific plants that they would eat. And I think even just the simple fact of these large animals walking back on the land, compacting the soils or introducing seeds or helping with the seed bed, I would think that would be so beneficial. I did read something about the elk in Yellowstone and how the reintroduction of the wolves helped with their elk population because they were overpopulated with elk. So elk can do some damage.
Thank you. Some Edgewater Environmental Coalition asked if there's anything you're excited about growing or plant you're looking forward to learning from this year.
Oh yes, absolutely. So I get asked a lot, like, what's your favorite plant? That's like someone asking you who's your favorite child. But if I had to, I would say rattlesnake master. Because we often think about the monarch butterflies and there's all this campaign of grow more milkweed for the monarchs, save the monarchs. Well, there's this moth called the rattlesnake master borer moth, I think is what the name is. And they only can live in rattlesnake master. They have that same symbiotic relationship as the monarchs do with milkweed. But I think they don't get as much attention because it's a moth and not a butterfly, and they're not colorful, but they are very pretty. And even the rattlesnake master plant is not as pretty as milkweed. They look like they remind me of cheerleaders, with pom-poms. But I if you're gonna grow something, grow some rattlesnake master. Save the rattlesnake master borer moth. That's not as easy to say as save the monarch butterfly, but I just love that plant. And I think there was a dig out in the Midwest a couple of years ago before COVID, and they brought up some moccasins made out of rattlesnake master leaves.
Wow.
So using the leaves as textile. And so those moccasins, I think, were dated over 10,000 years ago. So we have had this cultural connection with rattlesnake master. Yeah, there it is. Thank you, EJ, for bringing that. I think they're beautiful. But so they're like, that long lost relative with this beautiful past. So I just love them.
I have a couple questions that were sent to me via direct message. So I could read a couple of those if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm the only one who can see them. So someone wanted to know about the difference between cattle and bison, and their question is, don't cattle eat by pulling out plants with their tongues? Which
I don't know up close and personal how cows eat. I have seen cows eat before. I really didn't observe them, but I know when they're done eating, there's nothing left. It's bare soil. We were up close and personal with those bison, and they would nibble a little bit, and then they move on to a different area, and they would nibble a little. And you can see they're not eating all the way bare down to the ground. If that answers the question.
It makes sense. And I think that their hooves are somewhat different too. So it affects the soil in a different way.
Probably. I mean, and I think they're a little more larger creatures. So that the weight, I think, has something to do with it as well.
Okay, a couple more direct messages. Are there other keystone species you're aware of? I guess besides bison.
Wolves.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wolves. I don't know if we would get any positive remarks if I started campaigning to bring back wolves. I don't know. I think it was easier. It's easier to campaign for rattlesnake master and bison than for wolves. But yeah, wolves are and you see it with the reintroduction of wolves again in Yellowstone, and I mean they even changed waterways with that reintroduction, and so I think at least looking into how we can do something that would help our deer population, I'm sure.
Yes, it would. I guess coyotes are trying very valiantly to okay, so a couple little more direct messages, and then I'll turn it back over to Stephanie. If there were 3 plants to include in your garden from a standpoint of useful in food or medicine, what plants would you pick?
So I would pick again, rattlesnake master would be my first one. I would do another one would be probably wild raspberry, because that could be, the raspberries could be a food, and then you can use the leaves for teas, and that tea is a beautiful tea, rich in vitamin C, helps with the immune system, also helps with colds. Echinacea is a good one as well. That you can use the whole the seed head when it's dry. When you crunch on those seeds, those dried seeds, it gives you like a Novocaine effect, numbs your mouth. And so supposedly if you have a toothache, that would help. I've tried it. It does numb your mouth. I didn't have a toothache, but it does have this numbing effect. And then the petals and the roots could be used again as a tea to help with your immune system and help with getting over colds or even COVID symptoms.
Wow, very useful plant. Okay, Steve S. that says, thank Gina again for allowing me to be part of the study. It was very moving. I don't know if that's a
yes, he was part of our bison study.
Okay, all right, great. And then okay, last direct message, and then Stephanie, you can have it. Can Gina tell us again why she thinks the matriarch moved the herd away from the singer or drummer, or the singer?
Yes. So that last song that he sang, and we didn't record that one. That last song he sang was a song that they sing for before they do the kill. I say before harvesting to be kinder, but before they kill the bison, they do that's a hunting song. And so I think that bison maybe remembered that song through genetic transfer of knowledge, and knew that song was a song to harvest and decided we better move on.
Okay, to Stephanie.
So there was a chat's a little slow to pull up here. What's going on here? Somebody wanted to know about the bison. If they don't chew the roots up like deer do, is that what happens? Like they don't pull up the whole plant, they just kind of snip off the top or something?
Yeah, they're just eating the tops, it looked like.
Cool. And there was, that was the, oh, where'd it go? There was one, hold on, where'd it go? A lot of comments about the moth and sharing pictures about the rattlesnake borer moth.
Uh-huh.
Do you know, are they in particular areas, or like, so if we were, you know, in the Oak Park area or Chicago area and we planted rattlesnake master, is it possible that the moth would find it?
I would hope so. I mean, the plant is native to Illinois, so I would hope, just like the milkweed, we just start establishing, populations of this rattlesnake master.
It is really so beautiful.
Uh-huh.
So somebody, the bison are popular. If the bison won't eat invasive non-native plants, are there other measures you need to take to remove them? I think they're talking about the McHenry County.
Yes. So prescribed burns.
Oh.
So if you're with the, I would think with the bison establishing these new and helping the native plants and establishing that seed bed, if you were to do a prescribed burn, I think it would be more that burn would be so much more efficient with getting those invasive species out. And the other thing with the bison is that they will move if there's a burn, if there's a prescribed burn, they will move because they're native to Illinois. They have and they're wild still, so they have these genetic inclinations. They've lived with fire before. We've had fire before contact, and so they're accustomed to that fire, and so they will move out of the way in when there's a prescribed burn, as opposed to cattle. Cattle will just sit there.
Somebody, and fire was part of technology too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I think a lot of people don't realize. Do you want to speak to the use of fire in?
Sure. So we would use fire again for our planting. We would burn a section of the land so that we could establish our gardens, our food gardens. But fire was also used to manipulate the landscape, and it was used for hunting as well. So you would have a prescribed burn or a fire, and that would move the animals, move the game to a specific spot, would get them to move. So, and then you would have an encampment at that other spot and able to hunt a little more efficiently with that fire.
Thanks. Somebody asked about buffalo grass, if that was part of the rematriation for the buffalo herds.
I don't know what particular plants they're incorporating. I think it's just your usual prairie grass, native prairie grass seed mix that they're reseeding.
Somebody asked if there are other planting partners that are in relationship with each other, with one another.
So we talked about the Three Sisters, which is a great one. And there's a bunch of companion plantings. If you look them up for our vegetable gardens, there's a lot of different plants that work together. I think incorporating legumes, any type of legume into your garden beds is always beneficial with that nitrogen, keeping that nitrogen, especially if you're planting corn. Corn is such a needy plant, needing lots of water, needing lots of nutrients. If you're not careful and you're planting corn or any other crop that is heavy on water and nutrients, you can really deplete your soil and deplete your bed, your nutrient level. Incorporating those legumes is a big help.
I've been getting a lot of private messages from Blake Lenoir, and like about 5 or 6. So I did ask them to put it on, address it to everyone, but I will read one question. How did you feel about the reintroduction of buffalo in Illinois, and how does it benefit the Native American community in Chicago?
That's a great question. I love it. I think there was so many different outcomes that we weren't or that this group wasn't expecting. Even the outcome of us being part of this project, that was something that wasn't planned on. And being able to bring those cultures, traditional cultures and teaching. You know, Gabriel doesn't have an opportunity really to sing those Buffalo songs, except for that day that we did the study. And so being able to listen to that song, listen to the drum, perhaps maybe a next iteration we can, you know, learn the song, or someone else can learn a song, or bringing other cultures in. Hopefully with this partnership, we also would be able to find a local source for bison for our traditional diets, and maybe even products from that bison that we could use, you know, the hides, the bones, some of the other elements that the bison provides, and hopefully, you know, developing a partnership like that, or at least finding a way where we can work together. But I really love it, that because there is so much opportunity there. Again, this is just, you know, the first pilot program of this study, and so, you know, it's really limitless on what we could do, or what could try to do. I'm just very excited to see where it lands.
So Blake messaged me this question too. So lots of great questions. So Blake wanted to know why Chicago is named after the wild onion. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So Chicago, it comes from a native term, a Potawatomi word, Chicagoche. Chicago was coined by the French, and the word means wild onion. For the Potawatomi people, we refer to places by what we observed. So also Skokie. Skokie is also a Potawatomi word, or was derived from a Potawatomi word, meaning Muskoku, red earth. And so they referred to Skokie as the area with red earth. They referred to Chicago, the place of the wild onions. They referred to, we referred to the body of water, Michigami, big water, Lake Michigan. And now those with settlers who came in, took those names, those place names, and changed them. And this is why we get Chicago, Lake Michigan, Skokie, and there's several other names that are derived from other Potawatomi and other native words.
Did Native American, the Potawatomi cultivated wild lake too?
Yes.
So yeah.
Ramps.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you were talking to somebody and wanted to know where to go, and they said, "Oh, go where the wild onions are," you know exactly where it was because you could smell them.
So do you see anything else, Stephanie? Or
Just looking through. Somebody said, "Thank you for sharing your passion, culture, and wisdom." And they're going to add some Michelle's going to add some rattlesnake master to the Parkway, her Parkway Prairie.
Oh, wonderful. Yay. Thank you.
And then somebody, so Blake wanted to know, he wants to grow more plants native to the Calumet region, and didn't know if you had any insight or connection there at all.
So I think there are several folks that are working on bringing back more native plants to the Calumet region. I'm not, I don't particularly work in that area. We're more in the Skokie northwest suburbs. So I think the best thing for him is to refer to those Calumet area conservation folks.
Yeah, there's a lot of work with the Cook County Forest Preserves down there, and they're very welcome. And I think there's a nature center down there too. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And they would even welcome, if you want to learn by doing, like you could volunteer. You could go down there and you would learn a lot.
And that's the best way to learn. I know we have these, wonderful plant apps, plant ID apps, and those are great. Those are great surface level ways to get your feet wet with learning about plants, but actually going out there, looking at these plants, finding volunteer opportunities for these restoration work, just talking to people and getting those stories. That in itself is Native American traditional knowledge, or the pedagogy of Native American education. And so doing things like that, as opposed to reading is great, the apps are great, but don't rely on that soulfully. Go out there and do. You learn so much about a plant just by working with the plant, as opposed to reading about it.
Yeah, that's what Wild Ones is all about too. That's partly the mission of our group. Oh, I just want to add this one question. This is a good question. What is your sense of how deep and broad tribal native plant knowledge goes nowadays versus prior to European contact? What do you feel is the overall state of native botanical knowledge today? And I suppose we ought to really say Potawatomi rather than all native,
Yeah. So, I strongly feel that knowledge is a living entity, is a life form in itself. And knowledge being, we as human beings, we have such a short lifespan. If we look at our lifespan compared to the lifespan of a tree or a rock or a water, our lifespan's a blink of an eye. And so we can't ever, I can't ever, and I'm disappointed, can never learn all of the plant knowledge that has been learned. I can never do that. And so I am just a placeholder for some of that knowledge, with the responsibility of transferring it to the next generation. And I see that happening, and that's still continuing to happen. It is, and if you are, it depends on where you're at, and you're in what environment and what type of people you're working with. If you're in a Western science space, you may not get a lot of exposure to native traditional plant knowledge. If you're working with native communities, of course, you're going to get more. I think, again, it's a living entity. It will continue to live way beyond us, and for several generations ahead.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. Stephanie was.
There's Sandra wonders if Gina, if you think nature should have rights.
I think nature does have rights already. If you're thinking in the human legal sense, yes, I believe that unfortunately we probably will need to incorporate those types of human constructed rights. But nature already has rights. We talk about climate change, and we talk about destruction of biodiversity and destruction of land, and all of the things that human beings are doing, and save Mother Earth. Mother Earth doesn't need to be saved. We need to save ourselves. Mother Earth will be here long before we're long after we're gone. It just is a matter of what that shape is going to be, what that form is going to be with Mother Earth. I've even talked with folks about buckthorn, and how people are aggressively trying to remove this buckthorn, this invasive species that people call it. And none of our efforts are really doing much, not really making much of a dent in this buckthorn. Some of them are not much, and we're really bound just to by the science, the Western science is what we're bound to utilizing. We don't know the whole impact of this buckthorn, but I know in several other areas they're letting buckthorn be and living its natural lifespan, and it's able to balance out in that ecosystem. And so perhaps it's a different perspective that we need to have. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I as a long time manager of buckthorn, I will contribute that in my forest preserve that I manage, we are experimenting with new non-pesticide ways to not eradicate it, but manage it so that other species have a chance to grow. Because I've learned that it's someone called it a strong species, which means it's very human. It's human, not dependent, but interactive.
Mhm.
And so we're kind of experimenting with some different ways, like recognizing that, but then also recognizing that other species need a chance to grow, and sometimes they can't if there's
Yeah.
too much. So we're kind of working on it, and I'll be interested to see what happens.
And back in Kansas, there are even some farmers that when I talk to them about buckthorn, they're looking at me like I'm speaking a foreign language. Like, why are you what are you talking about buckthorn and invasive? We're trying to plant more buckthorn, and I'm looking at them as them, talking a different language as well. And they use that. They're like, our goats eat it. That's what we feed our goats. That's and then they don't eat the crops that they're growing. So again, different perspectives, and maybe we need to bring goats into our ecosystem. I don't know.
That's a funny thought. I like that. Well, yeah, I think I've mentioned Osage orange before. I've had a sweet spot for Osage orange,
Oh,
which was native up here until the Ice Age, and then so I don't think it's a non-native species myself, but anyway, yeah. So yeah, I do. I'm a volunteer site steward at National Grove Forest Reserve in Riverside. So Stephanie, any other?
So Wendy had an interesting one. Gina, does Trickster Cultural Center plan to collaborate, contribute to the 350th anniversary of the Chicago Portage later this summer? And this presentation has been outstanding.
oh, thank you. We would love to. We just need to be asked. I did not know that was happening. Send me more information.
Okay.
Okay, well, it's 4 o'clock, and
Thank you.
it's time to say goodbye. And I really would like to thank you very much for this. I wish everybody could gain a knowledge of our local native wisdom and knowledge, because I think it would help all of us understand how to behave on the land a little better. But that's just, so I really appreciate it.
I'm taking away the idea of more gratitude
Yeah.
to the land. And
Yeah.
to the people who stewarded it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. In the Potawatomi language, there is no word for goodbye. Many of our native languages, there is no word for goodbye. So instead, I say Bama P. Till next time.
Till next